All right, everybody, I'm ready to get started. Welcome back. Welcome back to the third to last class. 1 week left after this. We are at the very end. Everybody knows exactly what's going on at this point, I hope. We have the paper due on Tuesday. If you haven't already turned in the hard copy, again, you can do so up until the point we meet on Tuesday. So make sure, again, to either slide it under my door, come during my office hours, or turn it into to me in class. But beyond that point, I won't accept any more papers without docking you for being late. So just make sure that you guys get them in on time. As far as the mini papers go, I started going through them, but it's just going to take me forever. So I'm going to have to leave it till next week. So I don't think I'll have all the scores tallied up for all the paper related stuff till like right before the final. I have 3 different classes I have to do all that for, so you'll have to be patient on that. But again, if you've done what you've been expected to do throughout the semester, 2 to 3 page mini papers, turning them in, at the deadlines, then you'll get credit for them. And then as far as the actual paper goes, if you followed my guidelines on the syllabus, in the video online, in the information that I've given you in class, then you should be fine there as well. So there isn't much to worry about if you've done the assignment correctly, if you've approached the whole process correctly. But if you have not, then you have to accept that. You have to accept the result of that. All right, so we are going to finish covering Chapter 11 today, which again has to do with different sort of strategies that firms that have market power can use to maybe enhance the way they operate in markets. So we've been talking about strategies that yield even greater profits by the firms that aren't able to apply the methods that we've been talking about up until this point because they don't have the resources to hire economic consultants or maybe have an economic consulting department within the firm to provide estimates of demand, costs, etc. Then we went through a few different options that firms have to kind of ballpark the information we've been working on as far as the firm's optimal choices in monopolies, monopolistically competitive markets, and in oligopolies. So I'll quickly review that. Then we'll talk about the strategies that firms can use to extract consumer surplus. We started talking about that last time. Block pricing, two-part pricing, and price discrimination. Today we'll talk about the last one, commodity bundling. And then finally, we'll talk about certain strategies that firms can use to optimize their behavior given certain conditions they may have. So one thing is if they're selling related products, then they can take a loss on one if they're able to mark up the other product pretty high to kind of, it's called cross subsidization. So it's a way of subsidizing the kind of like what are generally termed in like retail as like loss leaders, sort of things to kind of draw in customers and then basically get them to buy the more expensive stuff. But the one that's most complicated is the transfer pricing, which involves the firms that are pretty big that have internalized the production of certain inputs via vertical integration. They face the conflict within the firm of managers of very large divisions wanting to optimize their own department's profits. And so that can lead to what's called double marginalization, where they mark up both the input and the final good to the market, which then distorts the outcome and doesn't optimize the profits for the firm. So we'll talk about how that works and sort of work through an example. And then finally, we'll talk about pricing strategies in markets with intense price competition. So we talked about how firms in Bertrand oligopolies can engage in price wars that lead to them basically undercutting each other to the point where they are charging their marginal costs and they're not able to make positive economic profits as a result. So in those circumstances, there are some strategies that firms can use to kind of get out of that situation, and so we'll talk about that slightly. It's hot in here, right? It's a little bit hot in here. Yeah, I don't think they've adjusted for the change in the weather yet, because you can't really adjust it in here. They have some grid or something, some big board that they kind of use for the entire department. So it's unfortunate, but we'll survive. Are there any questions about anything you'd like me to address before we enter our last week of lectures? Really? I like it. All right, so I mean, everybody knows what's going on. You know that this is the end, and like you've got finals, and my finals coming up, and so like I keep mentioning, and I'll just keep reminding you, like this is not the time to kind of relax at all. Like, and it's okay to kind of be at that sort of heightened state of like I need to get things done for an extended period of time now, because it's going to be worth your time. It's going to allow you to yield some kind of positive result over this overall experience that you guys have endured throughout the semester. And again, you're going to feel good about what you signed up for, what you walked away with, and you'll be able to enjoy the extra free time you have during the summer. Some of you have to work, some of you don't. For those of you that don't, you get to enjoy the whole summer. Take your mind completely off. But those of you that have to work, at least you'll carry with you the knowledge that you've enhanced your skills, you have achieved some good grades, and that is going to lead to better opportunities in the future for you. So this time is so important for you, and you shouldn't, again, shy away from it. Don't like hate it. Don't just like be miserable. Just like be in the moment. Just like, what am I doing? What do I have to do next? How much do I have to do? How much time do I have? Here's my plan, one day at a time. What am I doing today? Don't think about the volume of the work that you have to do, because that's really where the problem comes in, where you just start to kind of try to put it all in your head at once. Like, I've got 30 assignments to do and I can't think about it all at once and it's driving me crazy. That starts to affect your ability to just focus on what you're doing. And so that's why it's good to kind of always lay out for yourself what's coming up. What am I doing today? I'm just focusing on what I'm doing today because I know what's coming up and I've got a plan for it and everything's fine. And then that kind of gets you through without too much stress. Obviously, you know, you're still in the moment of all these things happening, but like at least you have a sense of like stability within the chaos that is this final time of the semester. And that's also the case with the paper. So when you're writing, like it's really good to like have a really solid plan with respect to like what your argument is. And so it's always a good idea to just, before you do anything, to like write yourself a little outline, like just like, all right, these are the points I want to make, and just always stick to that. Like just always go back to the outline, no matter how simple the outline might be, no matter how trivial, as long as like the outline represents a solid argument. Here's my thesis, here's my supporting points. Like if you're always kind of guided by that, then like you don't wind up like going in 30 different directions, and then it just winds up being like a mishmash of ideas that don't really connect and are just like kind of all over the place. So it's just, regardless of what you're doing, whenever you're expected to like deal with a lot of information at once, like you have to always kind of lay out a little plan for yourself, be it an outline, be it a schedule of things to do, etc. Like that's how you get these like kind of bigger tasks done that require more time, that require more sort of complex thinking, and a lot of balls being juggled in the air at the same time. So make sure you take those approaches. It's not just like silly things that you learn in like introductory classes. Write an outline. Like it's not. It's like it's a really useful thing. When I did my dissertation, like I basically wrote an outline first, and then for each point, like I just basically made that a new thesis, and then kind of made an outline for each point, and then it just kind of became this like branched off series of outlines, and I was just constantly working within, you know, my particular topic, and it allowed me to kind of move through it, and then ultimately have like a nice cohesive overall result, which wound up being effective and getting me through. So that's it's such a simple thing, but it's so important. So you know, make sure you guys are implementing that kind of approach when you're doing these things, papers, you know, whatever it is that you're doing that requires like juggling a lot of information. Anyway, so before I get moving with the material, any questions pop up? Anyone want to mention anything? Alrighty. Let us move forward then. So previously, again, we started chapter 11. So as far as the homeworks go, the homeworks have been open for a while, so you have the opportunity to jump on those whenever you want. Get this one done, but you can move forward with chapter 12 if you want as well and get that done as well. This class will have lectures through Thursday, and so we won't finish chapter 12 until Thursday. So, and then there will be a homework assignment after that, and so just make sure you keep that in mind. All right, anyway, as far as what we've covered so far, like I mentioned, we first sort of introduced a means of allowing firms to kind of ballpark the information they need to be able to set their optimal pricing to maximize profits if they don't have cost and demand functions estimated for them. So elasticities are easy to get via some information that you can get online through the National Bureau of Economic Research. And so then it's simple for a firm to be able to basically use the relationship between marginal cost price and elasticity that we've established throughout the course to kind of, again, ballpark the price that they need to set in the market. So their marginal cost times some factor will lead to the price. That factor is dependent on the elasticity. The higher the elasticity, the lower the markup will be, because this term will approach 1 and therefore price will approach marginal cost. So again, higher elasticity means that people are more sensitive to price changes, which means that there are more substitutes available in the market that are closely related to what the people are willing to buy. And so they tend to be more responsive to price changes by jumping ship to alternatives, if that is the case, if a price tends to change. Anyway, so this was the case of a clothing store manager using the data from that table. They can ballpark, again, what the markup should be. In this case for them, we estimated it to be about 1.32. So about 30% above their marginal cost is sort of where they should be pricing to maximize their profits. Again, given the fact that they don't have the estimated cost functions that you would need to figure this stuff out. But we also mentioned that there is a complexity with the linear demand, and that elasticity tends to change along it. And so that's why if it's possible to estimate a demand function, which is not difficult, and we covered it in chapter 3, if you have some data, then you can at least get that information and then use that to derive your marginal revenue, set that equal to your ballpark marginal cost, and then kind of get a price that way that isn't going to be affected by potential elasticities changing along the demand curve, which would then kind of throw off your calculation if you base it on that information from that table that you can get online. All right, so then we looked at so that was the case for monopoly and monopolistic competition. Then we looked at the case for the Cournot oligopoly. So for the Cournot oligopoly, we had a similar relationship between price and marginal cost. The only difference was that instead of using the individual firms' elasticity, and that's what we were using in the last section, we're using the market elasticity, and we're multiplying it by the number of firms in the market. Again, in a Cournot oligopoly, there aren't going to be a lot of firms, like 2 to 8 roughly. So the elasticity of the individual firm is going to be a function of the market elasticity. As more firms enter the you're going to increase the elasticity of the market, again, because there's more substitutes. People become more sensitive to price changes with the availability of these other goods that they can buy instead of yours. And so this essentially plays the same role as the last calculation, and it's, again, a way for a firm in a Cournot oligopoly to set a price without having to derive the reaction functions and do everything that we did in chapter 9, which you should be able to do, by the way. All right, so strategies that yield even greater profits. So then we moved on to, again, these strategies that firms use to capture surplus from the consumers if they have market power. Again, the ability to charge above their marginal cost. The only firms that don't have market power are firms that sell in perfectly competitive markets. Those are very unique marketplaces. You don't find them a lot, but they are generally going to be for like the most generic kind of inputs into production, like raw materials like oil and like lumber and steel, those sorts of things will generally fall within the Gesundheit, perfectly competitive market. So as far as like the stuff that you guys are likely to wind up selling via either your own business or the firms you might end up working for, those will generally wind up being, in either monopolies or monopolistically competitive markets or oligopolies, depending on, again, the nature of the market you wind up in. So you will have market power in the firms that in the industries that you guys are operating in. So these approaches will come in handy potentially for some of you. So again, one approach they can take is called price discrimination, which is charging different prices to different folks for the same good or service. So there's 3 different cases. The first case is the case of first-degree price discrimination, also known as perfect price discrimination, which requires a firm to be able to somehow know exactly how much every single person is willing to pay and actually be able to charge them that amount, which is difficult in practice. But we talked about how, like in certain industries where prices are not posted, like a mechanic or a lawyer or a doctor or a car salesman, like they or in the case of a car salesman, like they'll post a really high price, and then again they'll have the consumers talk them down to their willingness to pay, revealing their willingness to pay, therefore being able to charge them. It's a form of perfect price discrimination, but again, it's not perfect. Ultimately, the goal of perfect price discrimination is to capture consumer surplus. So again, this was an example where like this represented the marginal cost. Here's the demand, and so the consumer surplus, if the price in the market was set to $4, would be equal to the area under this triangle, right? The excess willingness to pay of all these individuals who are willing to pay more than $4 for the good. And so again, if you do a sum of all of their excess willingness to pay, it winds up equaling the area of that triangle you see when you have linear demand. So this is what the firms obviously want to capture as profit. They want to turn that consumer surplus into profit. A good aspect of this is that it leads to more efficient outcomes. Whereas, if we're thinking about the most extreme case of monopoly, they will limit if they sell the good at one price, at a single price, then they will limit the amount that's transacted. They will set the price as high as possible. That will lead to deadweight loss in terms of consumer and producer surplus. That is just basically a loss to society. Via mutually beneficial transactions that could occur that don't occur. But price discrimination tends to actually improve that situation, not for consumers, but for firms, because the firms do tend to get some of that consumer surplus that would have been lost as profit, which makes for a more efficient outcome, which again is what economics is all about, like trying to figure out how markets can be the most efficient. Now, as far as fairness, equity, that's a whole other issue, and that's something that should be talked about with respect to these things. But when we're talking about efficiency, we're talking about markets benefiting both sides as much as possible. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I did?
I was going to ask about efficiency for just the firm or like for like a whole economy as a whole.
Right, so for the whole economy as a whole, right? Yeah, for all participants in the economy, which is society, right? And that's why when we talk about efficiency, we also talk about like the welfare of the market, because we're talking about the welfare of society, how society is benefiting from the market via consumer and producer surplus. All right, so that was a case of perfect price discrimination. We looked at second-degree price discrimination, which involves posting a menu of prices for different quantities that could be purchased. So, maybe like a higher valued customer that doesn't value the good that values the good more than like lower value customers down here, they might be willing to pay more, and so maybe they'll buy only 2 units of the Acme Beverage Company's soda for $7.60, as opposed to those that don't value it as much, have a lower willingness to pay. And so if the posted price for 4 units or any unit beyond 2 is $5.20, then those people will purchase at that price. And so the firm will wind up capturing some consumer surplus from each of them, which is not the same, obviously, as perfect price discrimination, where all surplus is captured. But the more prices are set at different quantities on these menus, the more surplus that the firms are able to capture. And finally, we looked at third-degree price discrimination, which involves selling the good at a different price to different groups completely, and the necessary condition for that to be effective is that the customers that are able to buy at the lower price aren't able to then resell to the customers that have to sell at a higher price. So there have to be no arbitrage opportunities. And so we looked at how those prices can be set, and essentially they have to be set at the point where each of the marginal revenues of each group are set equal to marginal cost, effectively setting the marginal revenues of each group equal to each other. And then we went through a problem and figured out how to solve for those prices. And then we went on from the price discrimination to the second way that firms can capture consumer surplus, which is through two-part pricing. Two-part pricing is a strategy in which a firm charges a fixed fee for the right to purchase the goods, and then a per unit charge for each unit purchase. So you see that in like health clubs, where again there's an initiation fee, and then there might be a per visit fee, or like more of like kind of recreational clubs like golf courses. And so the way to go about pricing in these markets is to set the price equal to marginal cost, and then basically look at what the consumer surplus is at that price, and then calculate it and charge the fixed fee at reflective of the value of the consumer surplus. So they don't make any extra profit by selling additional units, because each additional unit is set at a price that equals marginal cost. So the profit they make is the consumer surplus. So consumer surplus winds up being all the profits that these firms make. But again, if they only charge one price, then they might operate like somewhere along here, let's say, and so then you would have all this surplus as deadweight loss, and they would not go to anyone. And then finally, we looked at the third one, which was called block pricing. So in block pricing, the firm figures out what is the total value to the consumer of purchasing the goods, and then they basically package them at the quantity where price equals marginal cost, and then they charge basically the total value to the consumer as the price for that package. So like toilet paper rolls, sodas and 6-packs, etc. The firm, again, they set their price equal to marginal cost, see how much people are willing to pay at that quantity, set the package equal that amount, and then add up the sum of the revenue at that price plus the consumer surplus, and then that winds up being the price they charge the consumers for the entire package. So again, that's block pricing. All right, and finally, we have what's called commodity bundling. So commodity bundling refers to the practice of bundling 2 or more different products together and then selling them at a single bundle price. Travel companies often sell package deals that include airfare, motel, and meals at a bundled price instead of pricing each component of the vacation separately. Computer firms bundle computers, monitors, software, and sell them at a bundled price. Many car dealers bundle options such as air conditioning, power steering, automatic transmission, and sell them at a special package price. So those are all examples of commodity bundling. Let's look at how that works. So suppose the manager of a computer firm knows that there's 2 customers who value its computers and monitors differently. So the table shows the maximum amount the 2 consumers would pay for a computer and a monitor. So here are the 2 consumers. Consumer 1 values the computer at $2,000 and the monitor only at $200. Consumer 2 values the computer at $1,500 and the monitor at $300. The manager does not know the identity of each consumer, so she cannot price discriminate by charging each consumer a different price. Suppose the manager priced each component separately. Let's say they had one price for a computer and then one price for the monitor. So to simplify profit computations, we'll suppose that the cost to the firm is 0. So we'll just take that complication out of the equation, and profits are going to be just a function of revenue in this simple example. All right, so if the firm charged, let's say, $2,000 for the computer, then it would only sell one computer, and it would earn the $2,000. If the firm charged $1,500 for the computer, then both consumers would be willing to buy a computer, because that would meet both of their willingness to pay, and thus both would buy at $1,500, yielding the firm profits of $3,000. So the profit maximizing price to charge for a computer, if the units are sold separately, is thus $1,500. Similarly, if the firm priced monitors at, let's say, $300, then in that instance, only consumer 2 would buy the monitor because they value it at $300, whereas 1 only values it at $200. By pricing monitors at $200, it would sell the 2 monitors and earn the $400. So the profit maximizing price to charge for the monitor is therefore $200 in order to, again, sell to as many folks as possible and maximize profits. So on the surface, it appears that the most the firm can earn is this $3,400, the sum of the $3,000 plus the $400 by pricing computers at $1,500 and monitors at $200. It turns out, though, the firm can earn higher profits by bundling the monitors and the computers and selling the bundle at a price of $1,500. I'm sorry, $1,800. So the total value to the first consumer of a computer is the $2,000 plus the $200, which is $2,200. So that's how much they value the overall package. The total value to the second consumer of a computer and a monitor is equal to $1,500 plus $300, so $1,800. So essentially, the firm looks at the combined value of the consumer, and they try to basically price at the lowest valuation, which in that case would yield the firm, in this case, $3,600. So by bundling the computer and a monitor and selling the bundle for $1,800, the firm will sell a bundle to both consumers and earn $3,600. If the manager knew precisely each consumer's valuation independently, they could earn higher profits by price discriminating and charge them exactly what they're willing to pay. But again, it's tricky to be able to figure that out. All right, so that's how commodity bundling works. They are able to capture some consumer surplus by bundling the goods together as opposed to selling them separately. All right, suppose there's 3 purchasers of a new car and they have the following valuations for options. Again, 3 different consumers. We're looking at air conditioning and power brakes. Consumer 1 values air conditioning at $1,000 and power brakes at $500. 2, air conditioning at $800 and power brakes at $300, and 3, air conditioning at $100 and power brakes at $800. We'll assume the firm's costs are 0. The first question we'll address is, if the manager knows the valuation identity of each consumer, what is the optimal price strategy? And the second question, suppose the manager does not know the identities of the buyers, and the question is, how much will the firm make if the manager sells brakes and air conditioners for $800 each, but offers a special options package, power brakes, and an air conditioner for $1,100? All right, so as far as the first question goes, if the manager knows the valuations, meaning what each individual is willing to pay for each component, and their identity, then obviously the optimal pricing strategy would be to price discriminate. So he will maximize profits through price discrimination, since resale for these products is unlikely. Again, we're talking about options in a car. So the firm's profits in that case will be $1,600 for the first consumer, $1,100 for the second, and obviously $900 for the third. So that's $3,500. So that's the most the firm would be able to make if, again, they're able to somehow get the consumer to reveal how much they're willing to pay. All right, second question. Suppose the manager does not know the identities of the buyers. How much will the firm earn if the manager sells brakes and air conditioning for $800 each, but offers a special options package, power brakes and air conditioning for $1,100? So in this case, we see that consumer 3 does not value the combined options at that amount, 1,100. So they would not buy the separate packages. The second consumer does, and so does the first. So they would certainly buy the packages. But again, by setting the individual prices at 800 for the brakes and the air conditioners, that prices out 1 and 2 from buying the power brakes independently, but not the third consumer who would be willing to buy it because that's how much they value it. Obviously, it's more important to them, and therefore they don't need the bundle, and they can just buy the power brakes at 800 and yield the firm even more profit. So the firm earns $2,200 on the first 2 consumers who do value the bundle at least $1,100. Consumer 3 again will not buy the bundle because its total cost is greater than the consumer's valuation of $900. However, again, 3 will buy the power brakes at a price of $800. So the firm, in that case, will earn the $2,200 plus the $800, which is $3,000. So the commodity bundling scheme allowed the firm to capture some consumer surplus and earn the greatest amount of profits possible, again, given the different valuations of the consumers, by offering a bundle of the goods and also being willing to sell the goods independently to the consumers. Yeah. So it's basically they did an analysis, right, of what like all the consumers value the goods together, and they figured out that by selling it at 1,100, they would at least sell to these 2, and therefore they would get that amount from both of them. And then, because if they bundled it at 900, then they would wind up making less if they sold to all 3. They'd make 2,700, which is less than 3,000. So that, via that analysis, they figured out that that's the best price to charge for both of them together. And again, it's about having information about how much people are willing to pay, but again, they don't know the identity, so they're not able to price discriminate. Alrighty. Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry. I missed you. Question 1? Sure. Because that's how much they're willing to pay for both of them. So if the firm can get them to reveal that. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it should be 50. Okay, good. I've presented this 4 times now in four different semesters in probably 2 classes each semester. And nobody's ever caught that. So nice job. I'll fix that later. It's just a typo. So it should be 1,500. When I made these, I was rushing. I was creating lectures for 2 classes. I was working night and day. It was rough. Anyway, yeah. So thank you for catching that. I'll remember to change that before I post it. All right, let's look at pricing strategies for special cost and demand structures. So the first one we'll look at is called peak load pricing. So many markets have periods in which demand oscillate. Sometimes the demand is higher at different times of the day. Sometimes demand is higher at different seasons. Toll roads tend to have more traffic during rush hour than other times of the day. Utility companies tend to have higher demand during the day than during late evenings. Airlines tend to have heavier traffic during the week than during weekends. So when the demand during peak times is so high that the capacity of the firm cannot serve all customers at the same price, the profitable thing for the firm to do is engage in what's called peak load pricing. All right, so the figure will illustrate a classic case of peak load pricing. So the marginal cost here is going to be constant up until QH, which represents the firm's capacity to service customers, and then beyond that, it just becomes vertical because it becomes essentially infinitely costly to provide at that point because they can't go beyond that point. So at that point, the firm is operating at full capacity and cannot provide additional units at any price. The 2 demand curves in the figure correspond to peak and off-peak demand for the product. So here we've got the demand for low demand times when, it might be like, let's say nighttime during summer for electricity, like when, people are running up the air conditioner a lot during the day. So at night, people demand electricity less. This is the associated marginal revenue with that. But during the day when it's really hot, everybody's running their air conditioning, so demand tends to be huge, and there's only so much electricity to go around, right? Like our infrastructure can only maintain so much demand of electricity. And so prices must be higher, and they are. And here's the associated marginal revenue with that. In general, when there are two types of demand, a firm will maximize profits by charging different prices to different groups. In the case of peak load pricing, the groups refer to those who purchase at different times during the day. So demand during low peak times is such that marginal revenue equals the marginal cost at this quantity, QL. So obviously that's the profit maximizing quantity they will supply. And then they go up to their demand curve to figure out the price. So they'll have this low price, PL for low, during low demand times. During high peak times, marginal revenue will equal marginal cost at QH, which corresponds to the firm's full capacity. So the profit maximizing price during that time is going to be the price that corresponds to the point where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. That's how much they'll supply during high peak times, and they will charge the price corresponding to that point on the demand curve, representing the willingness to pay by consumers. So as is the case in price discrimination, the firm also charges two different prices. If the firm charged the high price of pH at all times of the day, then no one would purchase during low peak periods because, again, their willingness to pay is lower during low peak periods. If the firm charged a low price during all times of the day, it would lose money during high peak times. So that's peak load pricing. All right, let's talk about cross subsidies. So a firm that engages in a strategy of cross subsidies uses profits made by one product to subsidize sales of another product. So this is one strategy that's used to allow for a lot of product variation as well in the economy, in which, you know, maybe there's like low value consumers and high value consumers. So if you think about the car market, in order for there to be more variety in car markets, as far as, like, you know, the most basic car for the most low willingness to pay consumers versus, you know, like the really kind of decked out, like fully featured automobiles, luxury class, whatever. Generally in those situations, like the firm they might even price the cheaper car below their marginal cost, but they will set the price of the more expensive car higher than they normally would, even given what we've been looking at in terms of like price and quantity, because in those markets they'll wind up making more money and the profits will be greater than the loss in the cheaper variety cars. And so that'll allow the firm to offer these sort of more varied options versus just like one option for everybody. So cross subsidization is one means of sort of allowing for there to be more diversity in products. The strategy is relevant in situations where a firm has cost complementarities, where, again, the extra cost of producing additional units is less because the goods are produced together versus apart. And the demand by consumers for a group of products is interdependent. So Adobe charges dramatically different prices for two of its products. We got Adobe Reader and Adobe Acrobat. Adobe enjoys economies of scope. Again, economies of scope is the firm having lower cost to produce the goods together versus apart. Overall cost, not marginal cost. That's cost complementarities. But they also have cost complementarities in making these two products jointly. So it's cheaper to design and distribute both types of software within one firm. Adobe prices Adobe Reader at or below cost, permitting it to charge a higher price for Adobe Acrobat. So this sums up that approach, cross-subsidization. Whenever the demands for two products produced by a firm are interrelated through cost or demand, the firm may enhance profits by cross-subsidization. And recently they turned to two-part pricing for their actual software packages. It's like they used to sell them as just a package, one-time deal, and now they're like a subscription service. Like most software companies, the Microsoft does it as well with Office. They used to just sell them to us. Now you have to pay on a monthly basis. So again, that is the two-part pricing. They look at basically again, like at marginal cost, what is consumer surplus, and then they kind of just figure out how much they're going to charge each month, and they wind up making more money. And we buy into it. I used to buy the package every like 4 or 5 years for all the Adobe programs, and now I'm like paying $30 a month for it, which is ridiculous, but it's my only option. Anyway, all right, transfer pricing. So this one's a little bit trickier. It'll take a bit of time to explain to you guys. So again, the pricing strategies thus far are based on the assumption that a single manager is in charge of pricing and output decisions. Most large firms have both upstream and downstream managers who must make price and output decisions for their own division. So we're talking about upstream, we're talking about like the higher portions of the vertical ladder of supply where, like inputs are being produced and then they're being put into the final product and then they're being sold to the end user. So there's various stages of production of a final good and service. You got to produce the bolts to put into the engine that needs to be produced, that then needs to be added to the frame of the car, but with the wheels. It's like there's a whole chain of production stages that occur. And as we mentioned in chapter 5, when we talked about like optimally procuring inputs, if spot markets are become too costly, and because of transaction costs, and if the contracting environment becomes too expensive to be able to set up a good relationship with an input supplier, then the best thing for the firm to do is to vertically integrate, to integrate the production of their input into the firm. So this is essentially the situation that a firm that has done that will find themselves in if, let's say, we're talking, and we will be tracking an example about a car manufacturer. If they decide to just produce the car engines themselves versus buy them from some input producer, then you're going to have two big divisions within the firm, and they're going to need managers that are going to have their own sort of motivations for doing things in order to stand out on their own versus kind of having the overall benefit of the firm in mind at all times, and that can create a conflict within the firm. So then, because of that, you need to be able to set a price for goods for the inputs that are produced internally as it's being supplied from the division that produces it to the division that puts it together to sell it to the end user. And so that's what this whole thing is about, transfer pricing. So inputs are transferred to downstream divisions where downstream managers operate plants that use inputs to produce the final output. So an important issue in this setting is optimal transfer pricing, the internal price at which an upstream division should sell inputs to the firm's downstream division to maximize overall firm profits. Transfer pricing is important because most division managers are provided an incentive to maximize their own division's profits. If the owners of a firm do not set optimal transfer prices, the result might be lower overall profits for the firm. Suppose there's no outside market for the input. So the engine that's being produced by, let's say, Ford for their Mustang, let's say, is only useful for the Mustang. So therefore, the upstream division that produces the engine effectively has monopoly power over selling the input because they're the only one supplying it. It's a weird way to think about it because it is one firm, but again, they are thinking about their own profits within their division. So suppose there is no outside market for the input produced by the upstream division, and the divisional managers are instructed to maximize the profits of their divisions. The upstream division manager has market power and maximizes the profits of the upstream division by producing where its marginal revenue derived from selling to the downstream division equals the upstream division's marginal cost of putting the engine together. So that is different than them setting the price equal to their marginal cost. They're setting it equal to the marginal revenue, which means that they are earning positive economic profits, which again, like internally can lead to essentially what's called double marginalization, which I'll talk about more in a second. So given this input price, the downstream manager would then maximize divisional profits by producing where its marginal revenue it earns from selling in the final product market, we'll call it marginal revenue D for downstream, equals its marginal cost. This implies that it too prices above marginal cost. So due to this situation, the downstream division ends up charging a price for the final product that's actually higher than the price and maximizes overall firm profits, because again, you have this double what's called marginalization. This double marginalization results in less than the optimal overall firm profits. So we talked about how, like, if there's increasing returns to scale, then if there's decreasing returns to scale, so at the other end of the long run average total cost curve, that costs will start to increase because firms get too big, and you have division managers that start to conflict. This is like an example of like how that could lead to that, where overall the firm winds up not operating as efficiently because it just gets too big. The divisions are too big, the egos are too big. There's not enough synchronicity between the departments, and so you get a bad result. Anyway, to circumvent the problem of double marginalization, transfer prices must be set that maximize the overall value of the firm rather than the profit of the upstream division. To see how this can be accomplished, suppose the downstream division requires 1 unit of the input, 1 engine, to produce 1 unit of the final output, 1 car. So that's what we'll assume here. Assume that the downstream division has a marginal cost of assembling the final output, marginal cost D, that is in addition to the cost of acquiring the input from the upstream division. The overall profit of the firm are maximized when the upstream division produces engines such that its marginal cost upstream, that's where the U comes from, equals the net marginal revenue to the downstream division. The net marginal revenue to the downstream division is equal to its marginal cost. That's going to be the optimal point. So again, this is what the firm needs to do. Like, the net marginal revenue of the downstream division must be set equal to the marginal cost of the upstream division, where the net marginal revenue of the downstream division equals the difference between the downstream division's marginal cost of putting the car together, and that being subtracted from the marginal revenue they earn from actually selling the car to the end user. So this is the actual benefit the firm gets from it's the revenue that they gain from selling the car and putting the car together. It's sort of the extra revenue that then needs to be set equal to marginal cost in the upstream division so as to avoid that double marginalization. I'm going to go through a few different versions of this calculation to make it clear what this all means. So to see why, notice that it costs the firm, MCU, marginal cost in the upstream division, to produce another unit of the input, the engine. The engine can be converted into another car and sold to generate additional revenues of MRD. So that's the downstream division's marginal revenue that they gain from selling in the final product market, only after the downstream division spends the additional marginal cost to put the car together. So to put the car together and to make the engine, it's the sum of marginal cost upstream division, marginal cost downstream division. So the actual marginal benefit to the firm of producing another unit of the input is the net marginal revenue. Again, it's the difference between what they gain from selling additional cars minus the extra cost of putting the car together in the downstream division. Setting this equal to the marginal cost of producing the input maximizes overall firm profit. So again, setting that net marginal revenue in the downstream equal to the marginal cost of the upstream is what will allow the firm to maximize their overall profits. The next concern is how to institute an incentive system that induces the divisional managers to maximize their overall firm profits. Suppose that higher authorities, so basically the overall management of the firm, maybe the CEO or maybe even like the resource holders, the firm shareholders, be they public or private. Suppose higher authorities within the firm determine that the level of final output that maximizes overall firm profits is going to be Q star via their standard analysis of the market. They set the transfer price, PT, equal to the upstream division's marginal cost of producing the amount of input required by the downstream division to produce Q star units of final output. So instead of the upstream division, again, like doing that double marginalization where they set their own marginal revenue equal to the marginal cost of putting the engine together, they are forced to set the price of the engine internally at the point where it equals its own marginal costs, and therefore pricing competitively internally, which again, like they're incentivized not to as independent divisions. So according to this internal pricing scheme, the downstream manager can now purchase as many units of the input as it desires from the upstream division at a fixed price of PT per unit. The upstream and downstream managers are instructed to maximize divisional profits, taking as given the transfer price set by higher authorities within the firm. So it's a two-stage process. One, there has to be an acknowledgement that there's a problem, and there needs to be an authority within the firm that's able to make that decision. And then they need to be able to calculate what the price should be that the upstream division should charge that transfer price, which is the calculations we made. So let's look at that one more time. So since the upstream division now must sell the input internally at a fixed price of PT per unit, it behaves like a perfectly competitive firm and maximizes profits by producing where price equals marginal cost. Since 1 unit of input is required for each unit of output, then the downstream division's marginal cost of producing the final output is now equal to, again, its marginal cost of putting the car together plus what it has to pay for the engine from the upstream division. So that's the actual marginal cost of the overall firm versus, again, this being set equal to the marginal revenue of the upstream division, which would be higher, which would involve a double marginalization. Since the transfer price equals the upstream division's marginal cost, and setting marginal cost equal to the overall marginal cost equal to the downstream division's marginal revenue from actually selling the cars, which is the marginal revenue we've been talking about throughout this entire course. And we know that overall marginal cost is equal to marginal cost of the downstream division plus what they pay for the engine. So that is just a corollary from that. And we know that the upstream division's price is set equal to their upstream marginal cost. And now if we subtract the downstream division's marginal cost from both sides, then we see that the upstream division's marginal cost is set equal to the difference between what the firm earns in the downstream selling of the car minus what it takes them to put the car together, which is their net marginal revenue. So it's just another way of getting to the same exact thing that I've already presented to you 3 different times, because it's kind of complicated and you should have to see it a few times to understand it. So again, that's exactly the condition for maximizing overall firm profit. So again, by setting overall marginal cost, where overall marginal cost is equal to the price of putting the car together plus that price, that transfer price that's set by the upstream division, setting that equal to marginal revenue by the downstream division will maximize overall firm profits. Let's look at an example. Suppose that the inverse demand for aviation general single engine planes is given by 15,000 minus Q. Its upstream division produces engines at a cost of 2.5 QE squared. So the QE represents the quantity of plane engines that the upstream division is producing, and the cost function is just a function of variable cost, which is 2.5 Q squared. But again, that Q is that number of engines, so it's QE. And the downstream division's cost of assembling planes, putting the planes together, the wings, the engine, etc., is equal to 1,000 Q. The downstream marginal revenue, therefore, is, of course, just equal to twice the slope on the inverse demand function in the market. So that's 15,000 minus 2Q. The downstream marginal cost is equal to 1,000, just the derivative of the downstream division's cost function. The upstream's marginal cost is equal to the derivative of the upstream division's cost functions of making the engine, the plane engines, which is equal to, again, 2 times 2.5, so that's 5 QE. Since it takes one engine to produce one plane, then Q, the amount of planes produced, will equal the amount of engines produced. So equating the net marginal revenue and marginal cost of the upstream division to maximize overall firm profits means that we are setting the downstream marginal revenue, 15,000 minus 2Q, and then we're subtracting the downstream division's marginal cost of putting the plane together, which is 5 QE. I'm sorry, it's this one here. It's 1,000 MCD. Sorry. So this is the net marginal revenue. Set that equal to the upstream division's marginal cost, and therefore we can now solve for the optimal amount of airplane engines that they need to produce. So doing a little bit of algebra, adding 2QE to both sides, and combining these like terms there, so that's 14,000, then we've got 7QE, so dividing both sides, we see that the optimal amount of plane engines to produce, in this case, is 2,000, which is the amount of planes that will be produced, yeah. So these, like the formulas aren't like, they're not anything different than what you've been doing. It's just a matter of like understanding the context you're working in and like knowing like what information you need and what means what. So you just kind of have to kind of think through the problem, and you'll get a lot of information. You'll be given like this information here if you were to have a problem like this, and then you could essentially from that point be able to come to this conclusion, understanding that you have to set net marginal revenue equal to the marginal cost of the upstream division. So it's about understanding the problem. You have to understand these things. That's the whole point of all of this. Like not just like memorize a bunch of random things or just have an equation sheet that you can use to get a score on an exam that won't reflect your actual knowledge. So you know what I mean? Like it's just like this is not a math course. So I mean this is a topic. You know, it's like it seems like really kind of out of left field, but like again, when you get to the end of the course, like you start kind of looking at like the more sort of specific cases that could happen, and that involves complexity because the world is complicated. We start from simplicity because we're starting from the abstract, but as we get closer to the end, you start to look at more sort of practical things related to everything we've been talking about, and that means more. It has to be more complicated because the world is more complicated than what we've been talking about. So the class is what it is. It's almost over. Just keep working hard, and it's going to turn out well for you. All right. There are curves, and you know it. So it's not like the end of the world if you don't know one thing. But you should know a lot. Anyway, the upstream division should produce 2,000 engines to maximize overall firm profits in this case. Since QE equals Q, the downstream division should produce 2,000 planes to maximize overall firm profits. The optimal transfer price is the upstream division's marginal cost evaluated at 2,000 engines. So just to figure out what the transfer price should be, that is set equal to the upstream division's marginal cost. We know that marginal cost is equal to 5 QE. Plugging in the 2,000 engines into that will get us the optimal price that the engine should be priced internally in order to avoid the double marginalization and for the firm to be able to overall maximize its profits. So the firm maximizes its overall profits when its accountants set the internal transfer price of engines at $10,000 per unit, and the divisional managers are provided an incentive to maximize divisional profits given this price. All right, now let's go to the last section of the chapter. This is pricing strategies in markets with intense price competition. Again, we talked about how firms in a Bertrand oligopoly can wind up in a pricing war, and unless they're able to tacitly collude, given again the interest rate that's available, If the interest rate is low enough, they should be able to tacitly collude and not wind up in that Nash equilibrium of setting prices at marginal cost and getting zero economic profit, but that's not always possible. So this is meant to sort of highlight other ways that firms can get around falling into that Bertrand trap, essentially. So the final pricing strategies we'll examine: price matching, inducing brand loyalty, and randomized pricing are valuable for firms competing in Bertrand oligopoly. Recall that firms in Bertrand oligopoly compete in price and sell similar products. In these instances, price wars will likely result, leading to prices that are close to marginal cost and profits that are near zero, as I mentioned. While the pricing strategies discussed in this section can be used in situations other than Bertrand oligopoly, they are particularly useful for mitigating, improving the price wars that frequently occur in such markets. First one is called price matching. So in chapter 9 and 10, we showed that when two or more firms in a homogeneous product Bertrand oligopoly, the Nash equilibrium is for each firm to charge the minimal marginal cost and earn zero profits. In chapter 10, we showed that if the game is infinitely repeated, then firms can maintain collusive outcomes by adopting trigger strategies, which punish rivals that deviate from the high price. Recall that this strategy can only work if the interest rate is low, and the firms can also effectively monitor the behavior of the other firms in the market. In cases where trigger strategies do not work, there's another way for firms to attain higher profits, and that's by advertising a price matching strategy. So a firm that uses a price matching strategy advertises a price and promises to match any lower price offered by a competitor. We've all seen these offers, mostly in electronics stores, things of that sort. Suppose the firms in a market play a one-shot Bertrand pricing game where the firms advertise a commitment to match any lower price found in the market. So we're just assuming they're meeting one time, and again, they're selling the goods without knowing what their opponents are going to charge, so they can't make a conditional decision on pricing. If all firms in the market announce such a policy, then they're able to set the price P to the high monopoly price and earn large profits. Since all firms are charging the same high price, consumers can't find a better price in the market. The result is that firms share the market, charge the monopoly price, and earn higher profits. No firm has an incentive to charge a lower price in an attempt to steal customers from rivals in that case, because if they lower their price, a firm effectively triggers a price war, which results in no greater share of the market and lower profits. You set the price lower, then that lower price can be shown to your competitor, who also has to set the price lower, and they're going to set the price even lower so that they can attract all the customers, and then that'll wind up getting down to marginal cost. Thus, if all firms adopt price matching strategies, the result is that each firm charges the monopoly price and shares the market to earn higher profits. An important aspect of price matching policies is that the firm need not monitor the rivals, and so it does get rid of sort of that extra complication we talked about in the repeated games, the infinitely repeated games, where the firms would have to make sure that their rivals aren't cheating on them and be able to have a punishment mechanism that's credible, etc. So if some other firm happened to charge a low price, a firm using a price matching strategy would get to price discriminate in that case. They would be able to charge different customers different prices. Before choosing to adopt a price matching strategy, there's two things to consider. First, you have to devise a mechanism that precludes customers from claiming that they found a lower price when in fact they have not. Second, you can get into trouble with a price matching strategy if a competitor has lower costs than your firm. So remember, firms set their prices at the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. If their marginal cost is less than your marginal cost, then they'll be able to set a lower price, and thus they will be setting a lower price than you. You will have to match that price, and then that price will be lower than your profit maximizing price, and it could hurt. So if your competitor's marginal cost, let's say, is $300 for a television set, and yours is $400, the profit maximizing monopoly price set by your firm will be higher than that set by your rival. All right, second strategy, inducing brand loyalty. So another strategy a firm can use to reduce the tension of Bertrand competition is to adopt strategies that induce brand loyalty. Brand loyal customers will continue to buy a firm's product even if another firm offers a slightly better price. Firms can use several methods to induce brand loyalty. Advertising, which won't work if consumers believe products to be the same. Some gasoline stations now have frequent filler programs modeled after the frequent flyer program initiated by the airline, which again can help to define their brand identity. Frequent filler programs provide consumers with a cash rebate after a specified number of fill-ups. So there are sort of ways to define it. And again, it's about setting yourself apart as something other than what actually is being sold. The more you can do that, the more the consumer believes that your brand is itself a product versus what is actually being sold. Obviously, the more they'll be willing to pay. All of you know this already, but it has to be mentioned in the section. And then finally, randomized pricing. So the final strategy firms can use to enhance profits in markets with intense price competition is to engage in randomized pricing. With a randomized pricing strategy, a firm varies its prices from hour to hour or day to day. Obviously, in posted price markets, it's difficult to do that, but obviously we have transitioned into a digital world where a lot of stuff is bought online, and so it's really easy to enact this kind of strategy. So such a strategy can benefit a firm for two reasons. Customers cannot learn from experience which firms charge the lower prices in the market, again, because the prices oscillate. And that increases the uncertainty about where the best deal exists. So by doing that, firms reduce consumers' incentives to shop around for price information. The second advantage of randomized prices is that they reduce the ability of rival firms to undercut a firm's price. Randomized pricing precludes rivals from knowing precisely what price to charge to undercut a given firm's price. So the stark examples that I've noticed are like during Christmas, like Amazon, you'll see like the price will range throughout the day because the deals are like constantly rotating. And so that stops you from being able to say, oh, well, I know that Amazon is selling it for this price and I can go over here and you know, like kind of haggle or whatever. Like it's just, it's uncertain. And so that uncertainty does allow the firm to then not have to be restricted to a price that can engage in a price war that, again, will price them down to marginal cost. All right, folks, you've survived yet another chapter in this class. We have one last chapter to go, one last week of lectures, then an exam, and then you're done, all right? It's gonna be over. It's gonna happen soon, but it's not over yet. Have a good weekend.